Property of the evening. How's everyone doing? How has your Saturday been so far? I hope it's been nice. Mine's been very quiet, but my last 2 weeks have been very busy, so it was a nice break. Hi, Bloom. Hi, Resnick. You look snug. I am pretty snug. I'm actually pretty snug in real life, too. Because I keep a ton of blankets and pillows in my house. I aspire to always have an air of coziness wherever I go. So, of course, when I got my own place, I was like, first thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna fill this sucker up with blankets and pillows. I got my email verified, so now I can chat with more streamers. Awesome! That's amazing. I'm really happy for you. Still getting a few things set up. Pardon me. There we go. Now I can actually read. I got a nice book full of a ton of public domain fairy tales for us to read tonight. Hello, Coffee Bean. This is just gonna be a nice, relaxing evening. You guys, me, and the book. Nothing crazy, nothing outrageous. Just a nice little evening where I read to you all. What kind of fairy tale are we going to be diving into? Well, the first book I found consists mainly of Hans Christian Andersen fairy tales. So they'll be a little bit sad, a little bit happy, a little bit not quite scary gothic though. Well, maybe in places, but it's not like the beginning of Resident Evil Village's made up little fairy tale. Which, by the way, God, I'd be playing that game if I had the money to drop $60 on a brand new game, but oh well. That's just where my life is right now. So instead, we're going to be reading chill-ass fairy tales. Oh man, I was gonna see how long I could go without swearing. Oh, crap, I messed that up. Right. Well, tonight's first story is, well, in the book it's just called The Mermaid, but I believe we all know this one. However, I don't know how many of us have actually heard Hans Christian Andersen's original writing. Like, you've probably heard, like, the short version, or seen certain movies, but how many of us have actually read Mr. Andersen's writing ourselves? Well, tonight you are going to hear his words as spoken by me, Rosemary Darling. Here we go. The Mermaid. Far out at sea, the water is as blue as the bluest cornflower, and as clear as the clearest crystal, but it is very deep, too deep for any cable to fathom, and if many steeples were piled on top of one another, they would not reach from the bed of the sea to the surface of the water. It is down there that the mermen live. Now, don't imagine there are only bare white sands at the bottom. Oh no. The most wonderful trees and plants grow there, with such flexible stalks and leaves, that the page turn slightest motion of the water they move just as if they were alive. All the fish, big and little, glide among the branches just as up here birds glide through the air. The palace of the Merman King lies in the very deepest part. Its walls are of coral and the long pointed windows of the clearest amber, but the roof is made of mussel shells, which open and shut with the lapping of the water. This has a lovely effect, for there are gleaming pearls in every shell, any one of them which be the pride of a queen's crown. The Merman King had been for many years a widower, but his old mother kept house for him. She was a clever woman, but so proud of her noble birth that she wore 12 oysters on her tail, while the other grandees were only allowed 6. Otherwise she was worthy of all praise, especially because she was so fond of the little mermaid princesses, her grandchildren. They were 6 beautiful children, but the youngest was the prettiest of all, Her skin was as soft and delicate as a rose leaf, her eyes as blue as the deepest sea, but like all the others she had no feet, and instead of legs she had a fish's tail. All the livelong day they used to play in the palace and the great halls, where living flowers grew out of the walls. When the great amber windows were thrown open, the fish swam in just as swallows fly into our rooms when we open the windows. But the fish swam right up to the little princesses, ate out of their hands, and allowed themselves to be patted. Outside the palace was a large garden, with fiery red and deep blue trees, the fruit of which shone like gold, while the flowers glowed like fire on their ceaselessly waving stalks. The ground was the finest sand, but it was a blue, phosphorescent tint. Everything was bathed in a wondrous blue light down there. You might more readily have supposed yourself to be high up in the air, with only the sky above and below you, than you were at the bottom of the ocean. In a dead calm you could just catch a glimpse of the sun like a purple flower, with a stream of light radiating from its calyx. Each little princess had her own little plot of garden, where she could dig and plant just as she liked. One made her flower bed in the shape of a whale. Another thought it nice to have hers like a mermaid. The youngest made hers quite round like the sun, and she would only have flowers of a rosy hue like its beams. She was a curious child, quiet and thoughtful, and while the other sisters decked out their gardens with all kinds of extraordinary objects which they got from wrecks, she would have nothing besides the rosy flowers like the sun up above, except for a statue of a beautiful boy. It was hewn from the purest white marble, and had gone to the bottom from some wreck. By the statue she had planted a rosy red weeping willow which grew splendidly, and the fresh delicate branches hung round and over it till they almost touched the blue sand where the shadows showed violet, were ever moving like the branches. It looked as if the leaves and the roots were playfully interchanging kisses. Nothing gave her greater pleasure than to hear about the world of human beings up above. She made her old grandmother tell her all that she knew about ships and towns, people and animals. But above all, it seemed strangely beautiful to her that up on the earth the flowers were scented, for they were not so at the bottom of the sea, that also the woods were green, and that the fish which were to be seen along the branches could sing so loudly and sweetly that it was a delight to listen to them. You see, the grandmother called the little birds fish, or the mermaids would not have understood her, as they had never seen a bird. "When you are 15," said the grandmother, "you will be allowed to rise up from the sea and sit on the rocks in the moonlight, and look at the big ships sailing by, and you will also see woods and towns." One of the sisters would be 15 in the following year, but the others, well, they were each 1 year younger than the other, so that the youngest had 5 whole years to wait before she would be allowed to come up from the bottom, to see what things were like on the earth. But each one promised the others to give a full account of all she had seen, and found most wonderful on the first day. Their grandmother could never tell them enough, for there were so many things about which they wanted information. None of them was so full of longings as the youngest, the very one who had the longest time to wait, and who was so quiet and dreamy. Many a night she stood by the open windows and looked up through the dark blue water, which the fish were lashing with their tails and fins. She could see the moon and the stars, it is true. Their light was pale, but they looked much bigger through the water than they do to our eyes. When she saw a dark shadow glide between her and them, she knew that it was either a whale swimming above her, or else a ship laden with human beings. I am certain they never dreamt that a lovely little mermaid was standing down below, stretching up her white hands towards the keel. The eldest princess had now reached her 15th birthday, and was to venture above the water. When she came back, she had hundreds of things to tell them, but the most delightful of all, she said, was to lie in the moonlight, on a sandbank in a calm sea, and to gaze at the large town close to the shore, where the lights twinkled like hundreds of stars. To listen to music and the noise and bustle of carriages and people, to see the many church towers and spires, and to hear the bells ringing. And and just because she could not go on the shore, she longed for that most of all. Oh, how eagerly the youngest sister listened, and when Later in the evening, she stood at the open window and looked up through the dark blue water. She thought of the big town with all its noise and bustle, and fancied that she could even hear the church bells ringing. The year after, the second sister was allowed to mount up through the water and swim about wherever she liked. The sun was just going down when she reached the surface, the most beautiful sight, she thought, that she had ever seen. The whole sky had looked like gold, she said, and as for the clouds, well, their beauty was beyond description. They floated in red and violet splendor over her head, and far faster than they went, a flock of wild swans flew like a long white veil over the waters towards the setting sun. She swam towards it, but it sank, and all the rosy lights on the clouds and water faded away. The year after that, the third sister went up, and being much more the most adventuresome of them all, swam up a broad river which ran into the sea. She saw beautiful green, vine-clad hills, palaces, and country seats, peeping through splendid woods. As she heard the birds singing, and the sun was so hot that she was often obliged to dive to cool her burning face. In a tiny bay she found a troop of little children running about naked and paddling in the water. She wanted to play with them, but they were frightened and ran away. Then a little black animal came up. It was a dog, but she had never seen one before. It barked so furiously at her that she was frightened and made for the open sea. She could never forget the beautiful woods, the green hills, and the children who could swim in the water although they had no fish's tails. The fourth sister was not so brave. She stayed in the remotest part of the ocean, and according to her count, that was the most beautiful spot. You could see for miles and miles around you, and the sky above was like a great glass dome. She had seen ships, but only far away, so that they looked like seagulls. They were grotesque dolphins turning somersaults, and giant whales was squirting water through their nostrils like hundreds of fountains on every side. Now the fifth sister's turn came. Her birthday fell in the winter, so that she saw sights the others had not seen on their first trips. The sea looked quite green, and large icebergs were floating about, each one of which looked like a pearl, she said, but was much bigger than the church towers built by men. They took the most wonderful shapes and sparkled like diamonds. She had seated herself on one of the largest, and all the passing ships sheered off in alarm when they saw her sitting there with her long hair streaming loose in the wind. In the evening, the sky became overcast with dark clouds. It thundered and lightened. Yes, it says that in the book. Oh, lightened. Pardon me. And the huge icebergs glittered in the brilliant lightning, were lifted high into the air by black waves. All the ships shorted sail, and there was fear and trembling on every side, but she sat quietly on her floating iceberg, watching the blue lightning flash in zigzags down onto the shining sea. The first time any of the sisters rose above the water, she was delighted by the novelties and beauty she saw. But once grown up, and at liberty to go where she liked, she became indifferent and longed for her home. In the course of a month or so, they all said that after their own home when the deep was the best, it was so cozy there. Many an evening the five sisters interlacing their arms would rise above the water together. They had lovely voices, much clearer than any mortal, and when a storm was rising, they expected ships to be wrecked. They would sing in the most seductive strains of the wonders of the deep, bidding the seafarers have no fear of them. But the sailors could not understand the words. They thought it was the voice of the storm. Nor could it be theirs to see this Elysium of the deep, for when the ship sank they were drowned, and only reached the merman's palace in death. When the elder sisters rose up in this manner, arm in arm, in the evening, the youngest remained behind quite alone, looking after them as if she must weep. But mermaids have no tears, and so they must suffer all the more. "Oh, if only I were 15, she said. "I know how fond I shall be of the world above, and of the mortals who dwell there." At last her 15th birthday came. "Now we shall have you off our hands," said her grandmother, the old Queen Dowager. "Come now, let me adorn you like your other sisters." And she put a wreath of white lilies around her hair, but every petal of the flowers was half a pearl. Then the old queen had 8 oysters fixed onto the princess's tail to show her high rank. "But it hurts so," said the little mermaid. "You must endure the pain for the sake of finery," said her grandmother. But oh, how gladly she would have shaken off all the splendor and laid aside the heavy wreath. Her red flowers in her garden suited her much better, but she did not dare to make any alteration. "Goodbye," she said, and mounted as lightly and airily as a bubble through the water. The sun had just set when her head rose above the water, but the clouds were still lighted up with a rosy and golden splendor, and the evening stars sparkled in a soft pink sky. The air was mild and fresh, and the sea was as calm as a mill pond. A big three-masted ship lay close by with only a single sail set, for there was not a breath of wind, and the sailors were sitting about the rigging, on the cross-trees, and at the mastheads. There was music and singing on board, and as the evening closed in, hundreds of gaily colored lanterns were lighted. They looked like the flags of all nations waving in the air. The little mermaid swam right up to the cabin windows, and every time she was lifted by the swell, she could see through the transparent panes crowds of gaily dressed people. The handsomest of them all was the young prince with large dark eyes. He could not be much more than 16, and all of these festivities were in honor of his birthday. The sailors danced on deck, and when the prince appeared among them, hundreds of rockets were let off, making it as light as day, and frightening the little mermaid so much that she had to dive under the water. She soon ventured up again, and it was just as if all the stars of heaven were falling in showers round about her. She had never seen such magic fires. Great suns rolled around, gorgeous firefish hung in the blue air, and all was reflected in the calm and glassy sea. It was so light on board the ship that every little rope could be seen, and the people still better. Oh, how handsome the prince was! How he laughed and smiled as he greeted his guests, while the music rang out in the quiet night. It got quite late, but the little mermaid could not take her eyes off the ship and the beautiful prince. The colored lanterns were put out, no more rockets were sent up, and the cannon had ceased its thunder, but deep down in the sea there was a dull murmuring and moaning sound. Meanwhile she was rocked up and down on the waves, so that she could look into the cabin, but the ship got more and more way on. Sail after sail was filled by the wind, and the waves grew stronger, great clouds gathered, and it lightened up in the distance. Oh, there was going to be a fearful storm, and soon the sailors had to shorten sail. The great ship rocked and rolled as she dashed over the angry sea. The black waves rose like mountains, high enough to overwhelm her, but she dived like a swan enough them and rose again and again on their towering crests. The little mermaid thought it a most amusing race, but not so the sailors. The ship creaked and groaned, the mighty timbers bulged and bent under the heavy blows. The water broke over the decks, snapping the main mast like a reed. She heeled over on her side, and the water rushed into the hold. Now the little mermaid saw that they were in danger, and she had, for her own sake, to beware of the floating beams and wreckage. One moment it was so pitch dark that she could not see at all, but when the lightning flashed it became so light that she could see all on board. Every man was looking out for his own safety as best he could, but she more particularly followed the young prince with her eyes, and when the ship went down she saw him sink into the deep sea. At first she was quite delighted, for now he was coming to be with her, but then she remembered that human beings could not live under water, and that only if he were dead would he go to her father's palace. No, he must not die, so she swam towards him all among the drifting beams and planks, quite forgetting that they might crush her. She dived deep down under the waters, and came up again through the waves, and at last reached the young prince just as he was becoming unable to swim any further in the stormy sea. His limbs were numbed, his beautiful eyes were closing, and he must have died if the little mermaid had not come to the rescue. She held his head above the water and let the waves drive them whithersoever they would. By daybreak all the storm was over. Of the ship not a trace was to be seen. The sun rose from the water in radiant brilliance, and his rosy beams seemed to cast a glow of life into the prince's cheeks, but his eyes remained closed. The mermaid kissed his fair and lofty brow, and stroked back the dripping hair. It seemed to her that he was like a marble statue in her little garden. She kissed him again, and longed that he might live. At last she saw those dry land before her, high blue mountains on whose summits the white snow glistened, as if a flock of swans had settled there. Down by the shore were beautiful green woods, and in the foreground a church or temple, she did not know which, but it was a building of some sort. Lemon and orange trees grew in the garden, and lofty palms stood by the gate. At this point the sea formed a little bay where the water was quite calm, but very deep, right up to the cliffs. At their foot was a strip of fine white sand to which she swam with the beautiful prince, and laid him down upon it, taking great care that his head should rest high up in the warm sunshine. The bells now began to ring in the great white building, and a number of young maidens came into the garden. Then the little mermaid swam farther off behind some high rocks, and covered her hair and breast with foam, so that no one would see her little face, and then she watched to see who would discover the poor prince. It was not long before one of the maidens came up to him. At first she seemed quite frightened, but only for a moment, and then she fetched several others, and the mermaid saw all the prince was coming to life, and that he smiled, and all those around him. He smiled at all those around him, but he never smiled at her. You see, he did not know that she had saved him. She felt so sad when he was led away into the great building, she dived sorrowfully into the water, and made her way home to her father's palace. Always silent and thoughtful, she became more so now than ever. Her sisters often asked her what she had seen on her first visit to the surface, but she never would tell them anything. Many an evening and many a morning she would rise, each turn, to the place where she had left the prince. Pardon me, I need to take a sip of water. She saw the fruit in the garden ripen, and then gathered. She saw the snow melt on the mountain tops, but she never saw the prince, so she always went home still sadder than before. At home, her only consolation was to sit in her little garden with her arms twined around the handsome marble statue, which reminded her of the prince. It was all in gloomy shade now, and she had ceased to tend her flowers, and the garden had become a neglected wilderness of long stalks and leaves, entangled with the branches of the tree. At last she could not bear it any longer, so she told one of her sisters, and from her it soon spread to the others, but to no one except to one or two other mermaids who told only their dearest friends. One of these knew all about the prince, and she had also seen the festivities on the ship. She knew where he came from and where his kingdom was situated. "Come, little sister," said the other princesses, and throwing their arms around each other's shoulders, they rose from the water in a long line, just in front of the prince's palace. It was built of light yellow glistening stone, with great marble staircases, one of which led into the garden. Magnificent gilded cupolas rose above the roof, and the space between the columns which encircled the building were filled with lifelike marble statues. Through the clear glass of the lofty windows you could see gorgeous halls adorned with costly silken hangings, and the pictures on the walls were a sight worth seeing. In the midst of the central hall, a large fountain played, throwing its jets of spray upwards to a glass dome in the roof, through which the sunbeams lighted up the water and the beautiful plants which grew in the great basin. She knew now where he lived, and often used to go there in the evenings and by night over the water. She swam much nearer the land than any of the others dared. She even ventured right up the narrow channel under the splendid marble terrace which threw a long shadow over the water. She used to sit there looking at the young prince, who thought he was quite alone in the clear moonlight. She saw him many an evening sailing about in his beautiful boat, with flags waving and music playing. She used to peep through the green rushes, and if the wind happened to catch her long silvery veil and anyone saw it, they only thought it was a swan flapping its wings. Many a night she heard the fishermen, who were fishing by torchlight, talking over the good deeds of the young prince, and she was happy to think she had saved his life when he was drifting about on the waves, half dead, and she could not forget how closely his head had pressed her breast, and how passionately she had kissed him. But he knew nothing of this, and he never saw her even in his dreams. She became fonder and fonder of mankind, and longed more and more to be able to live among them. Their world seemed so infinitely bigger than hers. With their ships they could scour the oceans, they could ascend the mountains high above the clouds, and their wooded, grass-grown lands extended further than her eye could reach. There was so much that she wanted to know, but her sisters could not give her an answer to all her questions, so she asked her old grandmother who knew the upper world well, and rightfully called it the country above the sea. "If men are not drowned," asked the little mermaid, "do they live forever? Do they not die as we do down here in the sea?" "Yes," said the old lady, "they have to die too, and their lifetime is even shorter than ours. We may live here for 300 years, but when we cease to exist, we become mere foam on the water, and we do not have so much as a grave among our dear ones. We have no immortal souls. We have no future life. We are just like the sea. We are just like the green seaweed, which, once what cut down, can never revive again. Men, on the other hand, have a soul which lives on forever, lives after the body has become dust. It rises through the clear air up to the shining stars. Just as we rise from the water to see the land of mortals, so they rise up to unknown beautiful regions which we shall never see." "Why have we no immortal souls?" asked the little mermaid sadly. "I would give all my 300 years to be a human being for one day, and afterwards to have a share in the heavenly kingdom." "You must not be thinking of that," said the grandmother. "We are much better off and happier than human beings." "Then I shall have to die and to float as foam on the water, and never hear the music of the waves, or see the beautiful flowers or the red sun. Is there nothing I can do to gain an immortal soul?" "No," said the grandmother. "Only if a human being so loved you that you were more to him than father or mother, if all his thoughts and all his love were so centered in you that he would let the priest join your hands and would vow to be faithful to you here and to all eternity, then your body would become infused with his soul. Thus, and only thus, could you gain a share in the felicity of mankind. He would give you a soul while yet keeping his own. But that can never happen. That which is your greatest beauty in the sea, your fish's tail, is thought hideous up on earth. So little do they understand about it. To be pretty there you must have two clumsy support, which they call legs." Then the little mermaid sighed and looked sadly at her fish's tail. "Let us be happy," said the grandmother. "We will hop and skip during our 300 years of life. It is surely a long enough time, and after it is over, we shall rest all the better in our graves. There is to be a court ball tonight. This was much more splendid affair than we shall ever see on earth. The walls and ceiling of the great ballroom were of thick but transparent glass. Several hundred of colossal mussel shells, rose red and grass green, were ranged in order round the sides, holding up blue lights, which illuminated the whole room and shone through the walls, so that the sea outside was quite lit up. You could see countless fish, great and small, swimming towards the glass walls, some with shining scales of crimson hue, while others were gold and silvery. In the middle of this room was a broad stream of running water, and on this the mermaids and mermen danced to their own beautiful singing. No earthly beings have such lovely voices. The little mermaid sang more sweetly than any of them, and they all applauded her. For a moment she felt glad at heart, for she knew she had the finest voice either in the sea or on land. But she soon began to think again about the upper world. She could not forget the handsome prince and her sorrow in not possessing, like him, an immortal soul. Therefore she stole out of her father's palace, and while all within was joy and merriment, she sat sadly in her little garden. Suddenly, she heard the sound of a horn through the water, and she thought, "Now he is out sailing up there. He whom I love more than father or mother. He to whom my thoughts cling, and to whose hands I am ready to commit the happiness of my life. I will dare anything to win him and to gain an immortal soul. While my sisters are dancing in my father's palace, I will go to the sea witch, of whom I have always been very much afraid. She will perhaps be able to advise and help me." I had to take another sip of water. Thereupon the little mermaid left the garden and went towards the roaring whirlpools at the back of which the witch lived. She had never been that way before. No flowers grew there, no seaweed, only the bare gray sand stretched towards the whirlpools, which, like rushing mill wheels, swirled round, dragging everything that came within reach down to the depths. She had to pass between these boiling eddies to reach the witch's domain, and for a long way the only path led over warm, bubbling mud, which the witch called her peat bog. Her house stood behind this in the midst of a weird forest. All the trees and bushes were polyps, half animal and half plant. They looked like 100-headed snakes growing out of the sand. The branches were long, slimy arms, with tentacles like wriggling worms, every joint of which, from the root to the outermost tip, was in constant motion. They wound themselves tightly round whatever they could lay hold of, and never let it escape. The little mermaid, standing outside, was quite frightened. Her heart beat fast with terror, and she nearly turned back. But then she remembered the prince and the immortal soul of mankind, and took courage. She bound her long, flowing hair tightly round her head, so that the polyps could not seize her by it, folded her hands over her breast, and darted like a fish through the water, in between the hideous polyps which stretched out their sensitive arms and tentacles towards her. She could see that every one of them had something or other, which they grasped with their 100 arms, and which they held to as if in iron bands. The bleached bones of men who had perished at sea and sunk below peeped forth from the arms of some, while others clutched rudders and sea chests, or the skeleton of some land animal, and most horrible of all, a little mermaid whom they had caught and suffocated. Then she came to a large opening in the wood, where the ground was all slimy, and where some huge fat water snakes were gambolling about. In the middle of this opening was a house built of the bones of the wrecked. There sat the witch, letting a toad eat out of her mouth, just as the mortals let a canary eat sugar. She called the hideous water snakes her little chickens, and allowed them to crawl about on her unsightly bosom. "I know very well what you have come here for," said the witch. "It is very foolish of you. All the same, you shall have your way, because it would lead you into misfortune, my fine princess. You want to get rid of your fish's tail, and instead to have 2 stumps to walk upon like human beings, so that the young prince may fall in love with you, and that you may win him and an immortal soul." Saying this, she gave such a loud, hideous laugh that the toad and snakes fell to the ground and wriggled about there. "You are just in the nick of time," said the witch. "After sunrise tomorrow, I should not be able to help you until another year had run its course. I will make you a potion, and before sunrise you must swim ashore with it. Seat yourself upon the beach and drink it. Then your tail will divide and shrivel up to what men call beautiful legs. But it hurts. It is as if a sharp sword were running through you. All who see you will say you are the most beautiful child of man they have ever seen. You will keep your gilding gait. No dancer will rival you, but every step you take will be as if you were treading upon sharp knives, so sharp as to draw blood. If you are willing to suffer all this, I am ready to help you." "Yes," said the little princess with a trembling voice, thinking of the prince and of winning an undying soul. "But remember," said the witch, "when once you have received a human form, you can never be a mermaid again. You will never again be able to dive down through the water to your sisters and to your father's palace. And if you do not succeed in winning the prince's love, so that your sake he will forget father and mother, cleave to you with his whole heart, let the priest join your hands and make you man and wife, you will gain no immortal soul. The first morning after his marriage with another, your heart will break, and you will turn into the foam of the sea." "But I will do it," said the little mermaid, as pale as death. "But you will have to pay me too," said the witch, "and it is no trifle that I demand. You will have the most beautiful voice at the bottom of the sea, and I dare say that you think you will fascinate him with it, but you must give me that voice. I will have the best you possess in return for my precious potion. I have to mingle my own blood with it, so as to make it sharp as a 2-edged sword. But if you take my voice, said the little mermaid, what have I left? Your beautiful form, said the witch, your gilding gait and your speaking eyes. With these you ought surely to be able to bewitch a human heart. Well, have you lost courage? Pull out your little tongue, and I will cut it off in payment for the powerful draught. Let it be done, said the little mermaid, and the witch put on her cauldron to brew the magic potion. There is nothing like cleanliness, said she, as she scoured the pot with a bundle of snakes. Then she punctured her breast and let the black blood drop into the cauldron, and the steam took the most weird shapes, enough to frighten anyone. Every moment the witch threw new ingredients into the pot, and when it boiled, the bubbling was like the sound of crocodiles weeping. At last the potion was ready, and it looked like the clearest water. There it is, said the witch, and thereupon she cut off the tongue of the little mermaid, who was dumb now and could neither sing nor speak. If the polyps should seize you when you go back through my wood, said the witch, just drop a single drop of this liquid onto them, and their arms and fingers will burst into 1,000 pieces. But the little mermaid had no need to do this, for at the mere sight of the bright liquid which sparkled in her hand like a shining star, they drew back in terror. So she soon got past the woods, the bog, and the eddying whirlpools. She saw her father's palace. The lights were all out in the great ballroom, and no doubt all of the household was asleep. Hold up 1 second. Crap. Sorry. But she did not dare to go in now that she was voiceless and about to leave her home forever. She felt as if her heart would break with grief. She stole into the garden and plucked a flower from each of her sister's plots, wafting with her hand countless... Hold up. Sorry. Countless kisses towards the palace, and then rose up through the dark blue water. The sun had not risen when she came in sight of the prince's palace and landed at the beautiful marble steps. The moon was shining bright and clear. The little mermaid drank the burning, stinging draught, and it was like a sharp, two-edged sword running through her tender frame. She fainted away and lay as if she were dead. When the sun rose on the sea, she woke up and became conscious of a sharp pang, but just in front of her stood the handsome young prince, fixing his coal-black eyes on her. She cast hers down and saw that her fish's tail was gone, and that she had the prettiest little legs any maiden could desire, but she was quite naked, so she wrapped her long, thick hair around her. The prince asked who she was and how she came there, and she looked at him tenderly, and with its sad expression in her dark blue eyes, but could not speak. Then he took her by the hand and led her into the palace. Each step she took was, as the witch had warned her beforehand, as if she were treading on sharp knives and spikes, but she bore it gladly. Led by the prince, she moved as lightly as a bubble, and he and every one else marveled at her graceful, gliding gait. Clothed in the costliest silks and muslins, she was the greatest beauty in the palace, but she was voiceless and could neither sing nor speak. Beautiful servants, clad in silks and gold, came forward and sang to the prince and his royal parents. One of them sang better than all the others, and the prince clapped his hands and smiled at her. That made the little mermaid very sad, for she knew that she used to sing far better than herself. She thought, oh, if he only knew that for the sake of being with him I had given up my voice forever. Now the servants began to dance, graceful, undulating dances to enchanting music. Thereupon the little mermaid, lifting her beautiful arms and raising herself on tiptoe, glided onto the floor with a grace which none of the other dancers had yet attained. With every motion, her grace and beauty became more apparent, and her eyes appealed more deeply to the heart than the songs of the servants. Everyone was delighted with it, especially the prince, who called her his little foundling, and she danced on, notwithstanding that every time her foot touched the ground, it was like she was treading on sharp knives. The prince said that she should always be near him, and she was allowed to sleep outside his door on a velvet cushion. Wait, hold up. I gotta pause. There's been a lot of weird stuff in this, but she didn't even have her own bedroom? She slept on a cushion outside of his room like a dog? Huh? Oh, there goes the chill vibes. Oh, man. Oh, what? That's so messed up. That's so messed up. Oh my god. Oh, I'm sorry, everyone. Back in reader mode. Back in reader mode. He had a man's dress made for her so that she could ride about with him. They used to ride through the scented woods, where the green branches brushed her shoulders, and the little birds sang among the fresh leaves. She climbed up the highest mountains with the prince, and although her delicate feet bled so that others saw it, she only laughed and followed him until they saw the clouds sailing below them like a flock of birds, taking flight to distant lands. At home in the prince's palace, where at night the others were asleep, she used to go out on the marble steps. It cooled her burning feet to stand in the cold sea water, and at such times she used to think of those she had left in the deep. One night her sisters came arm in arm. They sang so sorrowfully as they swam on the water that she beckoned to them, and they recognized her, and told her how she had grieved them all. After that they visited her every night, and one night she saw, a long way out, her old grandmother, who for many years had not been above the water, and the merman king with his crown on his head. They stretched out their hands towards her, but did not venture so close to land as her sisters. Day by day she became dearer to the prince. He loved her as one loves a good, sweet child, but it never entered his head to make her his queen. Yet unless she became his wife, she would never win an everlasting soul, but on his wedding morning would turn into sea foam. "Am I not dearer to you than any of them?" the little mermaid's eyes seemed to say, when he took her in his arms and kissed her beautiful brow. "Yes, you are the dearest one to me," said the prince, "for you have the best heart of them all, and you are fondest of me. You are also like a young girl I once saw, but whom I never expected to see again. I was on board a ship which was wrecked. I was driven on shore by the waves close to a holy temple where several young girls were ministering at a service. The youngest of them found me on the beach and saved my life. I saw her but once. But twice. She was the only person I could love in this world, but you are like her. You almost drive her image out of my heart. She belongs to the holy temple, and therefore, by good fortune, you have been sent to me. We will never part." "Alas, he does not know that it was I who saved his life," thought the little mermaid. "I bore him over the sea to the wood where the temple stands. I sat behind the foam and watched to see if anyone would come. I saw the pretty girl he loves better than me." And the mermaid heaved a bitter sigh, for she could not weep. "The girl belongs to the holy temple," he has said, "and she will never return to the world. They will never meet again. I am here with him. I see him every day. Yes, I will tend him, love him, and give up my life to him." But now the rumor ran that the prince was to be married to the beautiful daughter of a neighboring king, and for that reason was fitting out a splendid ship. It was given out that the prince was going on a voyage to see the adjoining countries, but it was without a doubt to see the king's daughter. He was to have a great suite with him, but the little mermaid shook her head and laughed. She knew the prince's intentions much better than any of the others. "I must take this voyage," he said to her. "I must go and see the beautiful princess. My parents demand that, but they will never force me to bring her home as my bride. I can never love her. She will not be like the lovely girl at the temple whom you resemble. If ever I had to choose a bride, it would sooner be you with your speaking eyes, my sweet, voiceless foundling." Side note, I am replacing most instances of the word dumb with voiceless because it just sits better to me. I apologize. As he kissed her rosy mouth, played with her long hair, and laid his head upon her heart, which already dreamt of human joys and an immortal soul. "You are not frightened of the sea, I suppose, my voiceless child," he said, as they stood on the proud ship which was to carry them to the country of the neighboring king. and he told her about storms and calms, about curious fish in the deep, and the marvels seen by divers. And she smiled at his tales, for she knew all about the bottom of the sea much better than anyone else. At night, in the moonlight, when all were asleep except the steersman who stood at the helm, she sat at the side of the ship trying to pierce the clear water with her eyes, and fancied she saw her father's palace, and above it her old grandmother with her silver crown on her head, looking up through the cross currents towards the keel of the ship. Then her sisters rose above the water. They gazed sadly at her, wringing their white hands. She beckoned to them, smiled, and was about to tell them that all was going well and happily with her, when the cabin boy approached and the sisters dived down, but he supposed that the white objects he had seen were nothing but flakes of foam. The next morning the ship entered the harbor of the neighboring king's magnificent city. The church bells rang and trumpets were sounded from every lofty tower, while the soldiers paraded with flags flying and glittering bayonets. There was a party every day. There was a succession of balls, and receptions followed one after the other, but the princess was not yet present. She was being brought up a long way off, in a holy temple, they said, and was learning all of the royal virtues. At last she came. The little mermaid stood eager to see her beauty, and she was obliged to confess that a lovelier creature she had never beheld. Her complexion was exquisitely pure and delicate, and her trustful eyes of the deepest blue shone through their dark lashes. "It is you," said the prince. "You who saved me when I lay almost lifeless on the beach?" And he clasped his blushing bride to his heart. "Oh, I am too happy," he exclaimed to the little mermaid. "A greater joy than I dared to hope for has come to pass. You will rejoice at my joy, for you love me better than anyone." Then the little mermaid kissed his hand and felt as if her heart were broken already. His wedding morn would bring death to her and change her to foam. At the church bells, all the church bells pealed and heralds rode through the town proclaiming the nuptials. Nuptials? I believe it's nuptials. Upon every altar throughout the land, fragrant oil was burnt in costly silver lamps. Amidst the swinging of censers by the priests, the bride and bridegroom joined hands and received the bishop's blessing. The little mermaid, dressed in silk and gold, stood holding the bride's train, but her ears were deaf to the festal strains. Her eyes saw nothing of the sacred ceremony, and she was thinking of her coming death and all that she had lost in this world. That same evening the bride and bridegroom embarked, amidst the roar of cannon and the waving of banners. A royal tent of purple and gold, softly cushioned, was raised amidst where the bridal pair were to repose during the calm, cool night. The sails swelled in the wind, and the ship skimmed lightly and almost without motion over the transparent sea. At dusk, lanterns of many colors were lighted, and the sailors danced merrily on deck. The little mermaid could not help thinking of the first time she came up from the sea, and saw the same splendor and gaiety, and she now threw herself among the dancers, whirling as a swallow skims through the air when pursued. The onlookers cheered her in amazement. Never had she danced so divinely. Her delicate feet pained her as if they were cut with knives, but she did not feel it, for the pain at her heart was much sharper. She knew that it was the last night that she would breathe the same air as he, and would look upon the mighty deep and the blue starry heavens. An endless night without thought and without dream awaited her, who neither had a soul nor could win one. The joy and revelry on board lasted till long past midnight, and she went on laughing and dancing with the thought of death all the time in her heart. The prince caressed his lovely bride, and she played with his raven locks, and with their arms entwined they retired to the gorgeous tent. All became hushed and still on the board of the ship. Only the steersman stood at the helm, and the little mermaid laid her white arms on the gunwale and looked eastward for the pink-tinted dawn. The first sunbeam she knew would be her death. Then she saw her sisters rise from the water. They were pale as she was. Their beautiful hair no longer floated on the breeze, for it had been cut off. "We had given it to the witch to obtain her help so that you may not die tonight. She has given us a knife. Here it is. Look how sharp it is. Before the sun rises, you must plunge it into the prince's heart, and when his warm blood When his warm blood sprinkles your feet, they will join together and grow into a tail, and you will once more be a mermaid. You will be able to come down here into the water with us, and to live out your 300 years before you are returned into dead salt sea foam. Make haste, you or he must die before sunrise. Our old grandmother is so full of grief that her white hair has fallen off as ours fell under the witch's scissors. Slay the prince and come back to us. Quick, quick! Do you not see the rosy streak in the sky? In a few moments the sun will rise, and then you must die. Saying this, they heaved a wondrous deep sigh and sang amongst the waves. The little mermaid drew aside the purple curtain from the tent and looked at the beautiful bride asleep with her head on the prince's breast. She bent over him and kissed his fair brow, looking at the sky where the dawn was spreading fast. Looked at the sharp knife, and again fixed her eyes on the prince who, in his dreams, called his bride by name. Yes, she alone was in his thoughts. For a moment the knife quivered in her grasp, and she threw it far out amongst the waves, now rosy in the morning light, and where it fell the water bubbled up like drops of blood. Once more she looked at the prince, with her eyes already dimmed by death, then dashed overboard and felt her body dissolving into foam. Now the sun rose from the sea, and with its kindly beams warmed the deadly cold sea foam, so that the little mermaid did not feel the chill of death. She saw the bright sun, and above her floated hundreds of beauteous ethereal beings, through which she could see the white ship and rosy heavens. Their voices were melodious, but more spirit-like than that no human ear could hear them, any more than any earthly eye could see their forms. Light as bubbles, they floated through the air without the aid of wings. And the little mermaid perceived that she had a form like theirs. It gradually took a shape out of the foam. "To whom am I coming?" said she, her voice surrounded like that of the other beings, so unearthly in its beauty that no music of ours could reproduce it. "To the daughters of air," answered the others. "A mermaid has no undying soul, and can never gain one without winning the love of a human being. Her eternal life must depend upon an unknown power. Nor have the daughters of the air have an everlasting soul, but by their own good deeds they may create one for themselves. We fly to the tropics, where mankind is the victim of hot and pestilent winds. There we bring cooling breezes. We diffuse the scent of flowers all around, and bring refreshment and healing in our train. When for 300 years we have labored to do all the good in our power, we gain an undying soul and take part in the everlasting joys of mankind. You, poor little mermaid, have with your whole heart struggled for the same thing as we have struggled for. You have suffered and endured, raised yourself to the spirit world of the air, and now by your own good deeds you may, in the course of 300 years, work out for yourself an undying soul." Then the little mermaid lifted her transparent arms towards God's sun, and for the first time she shed tears. On board ship, on board ship, all was again life and bustle. She saw the prince with his lovely bride searching for her. They looked sadly at the bubbling foam, as if they knew she had thrown herself into the waves. Unseen, she kissed the bride on her brow, smiled at the prince, and rose aloft with the other spirits of the air to the rosy clouds which sailed above. "In 300 years we shall thus float into paradise." "We might reach it sooner," whispered one. "Unseen we flit into the homes of men where there are children. And for every day that we find a good child who gives pleasure to his parents and deserves their love, God shortens our time of probation. The child does not know when we fly through the room, and we smile with pleasure at it. 1 year of our 300 is taken away. But if we see a naughty or badly disposed child, we cannot help shedding tears of sorrow, and every tear adds a day to our time of probation." And that is the end of Hans Christian Andersen's The Mermaid. Oh, I gotta take a big sip of water. Oh, big sip. Oh. Also, thank you, Super Cat Punch, for the follow. I'm sorry I only just now saw this. I was immersed in reading. But yes, does anyone have any comments or thoughts? Or, dear God, the prince made her sleep on a dog bed outside his room. What a jackass. Oh, my cat was so hyper earlier, but I looked over and he's sound asleep right next to me. This is the cutest thing. I'm not even kidding. He looks so sweet right now. Oh, I think he likes the sound of my voice. And then again, he always has. Because generally when I try to soothe my animals, I talk to them very softly. And so, I guess... I guess he's just like, oh, mother is speaking in the soft voice. I will take a big nap now. He's passed out. He looks so peaceful. Hold up, I'm checking to see. What the next story looks like, because there was a few elements in that story that I was like, yeah, like, I had to censor a few things as I went, but it's like... yeah, like... nobody's perfect. Nobody's nerfect. I hope this next one's shorter because, oh my god. Oh, it is. Oh, thank god. I might actually read this one before the end of stream. Alright, so this next one is called Clodhopper, which, oh my god, that is going to be a hell of a name to read. And I hope there's no elements in it that make me cringe, because I did not pre-screen these. I probably should next time. That's on me. At least it's not like H.P. Lovecraft, though, and I don't have to worry about running into the N-word. That's nice. I'm very grateful about that, thank you. Thank you, Hans Christian Andersen, for not including racial slurs. Alright, Hans Clodhopper. There was once an old mansion in the century, in which an old squire lived with his 2 sons, and these 2 sons were too clever by half. They had made up their minds to propose to the king's daughter, and they ventured to do so because she had made it known that she would take any man for a husband who had the most to say for himself. These took 2 weeks over their preparations. It was all the time they had for it, but it was quite enough with all of their accomplishments, which were most useful. One of them he knew the Latin dictionary by heart, and the town newspapers for 3 years either forwards or backwards. The second one had made himself acquainted with all the statutes of the corporations, and what every alderman had to know. So he thought he was competent to talk about affairs of state, and he also knew how to embroider a harness, for he was clever with his fingers. I shall win the king's daughter, they both said, and their father gave each of them a beautiful horse. The one who could repeat the dictionary and the newspapers had a coal-black one, while the other one, who was learned in guilds and embroideries, had a milk-white one. Then they smeared the corners of their mouths with oils to make them more flexible. All their servants were assembled in the courtyard to see them mount, but just then the third brother came up, for there were 3, only nobody had made any account of this one, Hans Clodhopper, as he had no accomplishments like his brothers. "Where are you going with all your fine clothes on?" he asked. "To court, to talk ourselves into favor with the princess. Haven't you heard the news which is being drummed all over the country?" And with that they told him the news. "Preserve us! Then I must go too," said Hans Clodhopper, but his brothers laughed and rode away. "Father, give me a horse. I want to get married too. If she takes me, and if she doesn't take me, I shall take her all the same." Hans! I'm sorry, I just woke up my cat. Hans, I'm already not rooting for you. Okay. We're continuing. Stuff and nonsense, said his father. I will give no horse to you. Why, you have got nothing to say for yourself. Now your brothers are fine fellows. If I mayn't have a horse, said Hans Clodhopper, I'll take the billy goat. He is my own, and he can carry me very well. And he seated himself astride the billy goat, dug his heels into its side, and galloped off down the high road. Whew! What a pace they went at! Here I come, shouted Hans Clodhopper, and he sang till the air rang with it. The brothers rode on in silence. They did not say a word to each other, for they had to store up every good idea which they wanted to produce later on, and their speeches had to be very carefully thought out. Hello, shouted Hans Clodhopper. Here I come. See what I found on the road. And he showed them a dead crow. What on earth will you do with that, Clodhopper? They said. I will give it to the king's daughter. Yes, I would do that, said they, and they rode on laughing. Hello, here I come. See what I have found. What? One doesn't find such things as this every day on the road. The brothers turned round to see what it was. Clodhopper, they said, it's nothing but an old wooden shoe with the upper part broken off. Is the princess to have that too? Yes, indeed she is, said Hans, and the brothers again rode on laughing. Hello, hello, here I am, shouted Hans Clodhopper. Now this is famous. What have you found this time? Asked the brothers. Won't the princess be delighted? Why, said the brothers, it's only sand picked up out of the ditch. Yes, it is, said Hans Clodhopper, and the finest kind of sand, too. You can hardly hold it. And he filled his pockets with it. The brothers rode on as fast as they could and arrived at the town gates a whole hour before him. At the gate the suitors received tickets in the order of their arrival, and they were arranged in rows, 6 in each file, and so close together they could not move their arms, which is a very good thing, or they would torn off each other's garments, merely because one stood in front of the other. All the other inhabitants of the town stood round the castle, peeping in at the windows to see the king's daughters receive their suitors, and as each one came in the room he lost the power of speech. No good, said the princess. Away with him! Now came the brother who could repeat the lexicon, but he had entirely forgotten it while standing in the rakes. The floor creaked and the ceiling was made of looking-glass, and he saw himself standing on his head, and at every window sat 3 clerks and an alderman, who wrote down all that was said, so that it might be sent to the papers at once, and sold for a halfpenny at the street corners. It was terrible, and the stoves had been heated to such a degree that they got red hot at the top. It is terribly hot in here, said the suitor. That is because my father is roasting cockerels today, said the princess. Bah! He stood there like a fool. He had not expected a conversation of this kind, and he could not think of a word to say, just when he wanted to be specially witty. No good, said the king's daughter. Away with him, and he had to go. Then came the second brother. There's a fearful heat, said he. Yes, we are roasting cockerels today, said the king's daughter. What? Said he, and all the reporters duly wrote, what did... ... what? No good, said the king's daughter. Away with him! Then came Hans Clodhopper. He rode the billy goat right into the room. What a burning heat you have here, said he. That's because I am roasting cockerels, said the king's daughter. That is very convenient, said Hans Clodhopper. Then I suppose I can get a crow roasted too. Yes, very well, said the king's daughter. But have you anything to roast it in? For I have neither pot nor pan. But I have, said Hans Clodhopper. Here is a cooking pot. And he brought out the wooden shoe and put the crow in it. Why, you have enough for a whole meal, said the king's daughter. But where shall we get any dripping to baste it with? Oh, I have some in my pocket, said Hans Clodhopper. I have enough and to spare. And he poured a little of the sand out of his pocket. Now I like that, said the princess. You have an answer for everything, and you have something to say for yourself. I will have you for a husband. But do you know that every word we have said will be in the paper tomorrow, and for every window sit 3 clerks and an alderman, and the alderman is the worst, for he doesn't understand. She said this to frighten him. All of the clerks snickered and made blots of ink on the floor. Oh, those are the gentry, said Hans Clodhopper. Then I must give the alderman the best thing I have. And he turned out his pockets and threw the sand in his face. Pocket sand! Pocket sand! Pocket sand! Oh my god. That was cleverly done, said the princess. I couldn't have done it, but I will try to learn. So Hans Clodhopper became king, and gained a wife and a crown and sat upon the throne. We have this straight out of the alderman's newspaper, but it is not to be depended upon. The end. Fucking say it. Oh my god. Okay, any comments about Hans Clodhopper? Number one, Hans, learn consent. Two, fucking say it. Oh my god, I'm fucking screaming on the inside. Pocket sand, you know? Pocket sand! Pocket sand! That's no. Oh, he's not even a gnome. He's just some dude. Alright. Next story looks pretty short, so I will read this one as well. And this one is called The Flying Trunk. There was once a merchant who was so rich that he might have paved the whole street, and a little alley besides, with silver money. But he didn't do it. He knew better how to use his money than that. If he laid out a penny, he got half a crown in return. Such a clever man of business was he. And then he died. His son got all the money, and he led a merry life. He used to go to masquerades every night, made kites of banknotes, and played ducks and drakes with gold coins instead of stones. In this way the money soon went. At last he had only a penny left, and no clothes except an old dressing gown and a pair of slippers. His friends cared for him no longer. They couldn't walk about the streets with him. But one of them, who was kind, sent him an old trunk and said, "Pack up." Now this was all very well, but he had nothing to pack, so he got into the trunk himself. It was a most peculiar trunk. If you had pressed the lock and the trunk could fly. And this is what happened. With a whiz that flew up the chimney. High above the clouds, further and further away, the bottom of it cracked ominously, and he was dreadfully afraid it would go to pieces, and a nice fall he would have had. Heaven preserve us! At last he arrived in the country of the Turks. He hid the cut trunk in a wood under the dead leaves and walked into towns. He could easily do that. Hold up. I have to screen for racism. I'm familiar with Coffee Bean is here. I'm just... Okay, so I just started from here to going down, because I'm afraid that something racist is going to be... Like, that just seems kind of to me. And I'm like... Ah, and there's a lack of consent.
Oh, yep, no.
Oh, we're gonna stop there. We're gonna stop the flying trunk there because, oh my god, we got a little casual racism. We got a little, non-consent. No, no. The flying trunk is a miss. We're gonna stop there. I love fairy tales. Also, hi, Nat Sapphire. I swear the earlier part of the stream was much cozier when I was reading The Little Mermaid. Ah, this next one is called The Rose Elf. Hopefully, it will be a lot nicer. And I won't have to stop in the middle of it and go, oh dear sweet monkey fuck. In the middle of a garden grew a rose tree. It was full of roses, and then the loveliest of them all lived an elf. He was so tiny that no human eye could see him. He had a snug little room behind every petal of the rose. He was all well made and as perfect as any human child, and he had wings reaching from his shoulders to his feet. Oh, what a delicious scent there was in his room, and how lovely and transparent the walls were, for they were the palest pink rose petals. All day he reveled in the sunshine, flew from flower to flower, and danced on the wings of fluttering butterflies. Then he would measure how many steps he would have to take to run along all the high roads and paths on a linden leaf. These paths were what we call veins, but they were endless roads to him. Before he came to the end of them, the sun went down, for he had begun rather late. It became very cold, the dew fell and the wind blew. It was a high time for him to get home. He hurried as much as he could, but the rose had shut itself up, and he could not get in. Not a single rose was open. The poor little rose elf was dreadfully frightened. He had never been out in the night before. He had always slept so safely beneath his cozy rose leaves. Oh, it would surely be his death. At the other end of the garden, he knew there was an arbor covered with delicious honeysuckle. The flowers looked beautiful, like beautiful painted horns. He would get into one of those and sleep till morning. He flew along to it. Hush! There was already 2 people in the arbor, a young handsome man and a lovely maiden. They sat side by side and wished they might never more be parted. So tenderly did they love each other. They loved each other more dearly than the best child can even love its father and mother. Still, we must part, said the young man. Your brother is not friendly to us, therefore he sends me on such a distant errand, far away over mountains and oceans. Goodbye, my sweetest bride, for you are that to me, you know. Then they kissed each other, and the girl wept and gave him a rose. But before she gave it to him, she pressed a kiss upon it, a kiss so tender and impassioned that the rose spread its petals. Then the little elf flew in and leaned his head against the delicate fragrant walls, but he could hear them saying, "Farewell, farewell." And he felt that the rose was placed upon the young man's heart. Ah, how it beat! The little elf could not go to sleep because of its beating. The rose did not remain long undisturbed on that beating heart. The young man took it out, and he walked alone through the dark wood, and it kissed it passionately many times. The little elf thought he would be crushed to death. He could feel the young man's burning lips through the leaves, and the rose opened as if it might have done under the midday sun. Then another man came up behind, dark and angry. It was the pretty girl's wicked brother. He took out a long, sharp knife, and while the other one was kissing the rose, the bad man stabbed him. He cut off his head and buried it with the body in the soft earth under the linden tree. Now he is dead and done with, thought the wicked brother. He will never come back any more. He had a long journey to take over mountains and oceans, where one's life may easily be lost, and he has lost his. He will never come back, and my sister will never dare to ask me about him. Then he raked up the dead leaves with his foot, over the earth where it had been disturbed, and went home again in the darkness of the night. But he was not alone, as he had thought. The little elf went with him. He was hidden in a withered linden leaf which had fallen from the tree onto the bad man's head while he was digging the grave. It was covered by his hat now, and it was so dark inside, where the little elf sat trembling with fear and anger at the wicked deed. The bad man got home in the early morning. He took off his hat and went into his sister's bedroom. Why are you going in there, buddy? I'm nervous. I'm scared. That's Christian Anderson! Don't do this to me, homie. There lay the pretty blooming girl dreaming about her beloved, whom she thought was so far away, beyond mountains and woods. The wicked brother leaned over her with an evil laugh, such as a fiend might laugh. The withered leaf fell out of his hair upon the counterpane, but he never touched it, and went away to get a little sleep himself. Oh, thank God. But the elf crept out of the dead leaf and into the ear of the sleeping girl, and told her, as in a dream, the tale of the terrible murder. He described the place where her brother had committed the murder, and where he had laid the body. He told her about the flowering linden tree, and said, "So that you may not think all I've told you is but a mere dream, you will find a withered leaf upon your bed." This she found as he had said when she woke. Oh, what bitter, bitter tears she shed! To no one did she dare betray her grief. Her window stood open all day, and the little elf could easily have gotten into the garden to the roses and all other flowers, but he could not bear to leave the sorrowing girl. A monthly rose bush stood in the window, and he took up his place in one of the flowers. Once he could watch the poor girl. Her brother came often into her room, and he was merry with an evil mirth, but she dared not say a word about the grief in her heart. When night came, she stole out of the house and into the wood, to the place where the linden tree stood. She tore away the leaves from the ground and dug down into the earth, and at once found him who had been murdered. Oh, how she wept and prayed that too might soon die. Gladly she would have taken the body home with her could she have done so, but she took the pale head with closed eyes, kissed the cold lips, gross, and shook the earth out of his beautiful hair. This shall be mine, she said, when she had covered up the body with earth and leaves. Then she took the head home with her, and a little spray of the jasmine tree which flowered in the wood where he was killed. As soon as she reached her room, she fetched the biggest flower pot she could find, and laid the head of the dead man in it, covered it with earth, and planted the sprig of jasmine in the pot. Farewell, farewell, whispered the little elf. He could no longer bear to look at such grief and such debauchery. So he flew away into the garden to his rose, but it was withered, and only a few faded leaves hung round the green calyx. Alas, how quickly the good and the beautiful pass away, sighed the elf. At last he found another rose and made it his home. He could dwell in its safety beyond its fragrant petals. Every morning he flew to the poor girl's window, and she was always there, weeping by the flower pot. Her salt tears fell upon the jasmine, and for every day that she grew paler and paler, the sprig gained in strength and vigor. One shoot appeared after another, and then little white flower buds showed themselves, and she kissed them. But her wicked brother scolded her, and asked if she was crazy. He did not like to see, and could not imagine why, she was always hanging weeping over the flower pot. He did not know what eyes lay hidden there, closed forever, nor what red lips had returned to dust within its depths. She leaned her head against the flower pot, and the little elf found her there, fallen into a gentle slumber. He crept into her ear, and whispered to her that evening in the arbor about the scented roses and the love of the elves. She dreamt these sweet dreams, and while she dreamt, her life passed away. She was dead. She had died a peaceful death, and had passed to heaven to her beloved. The jasmine opened its big white blossoms, and they gave out their sweetest scent. They had no other way of weeping over the dead. The wicked brother saw the beautiful flowering plant, and he took it for himself as an inheritance. He put it into his own bedroom, close by his bedside, because it was so beautiful to look at, and smelled so sweet and fresh. The little rose elf accompanied it, and flew from blossom to blossom. In each lived a little elf, and to each one he told the story of the murdered man, whose head now rested under the earth. He told them about the wicked brother and his poor sister. "We know it," said each little creature. "We know it. Did we not spring from those murdered eyes and lips? We know it! We know it!" And they nodded their heads so oddly. The rose elf could not understand how they could be so quiet about it, and he flew to the bees who were gathering honey. He told them the story about the wicked brother, and all the bees told their queen, who commanded them all to kill the murderer next morning. But in the night, the first night after his sister's death, when the brother was asleep in his bed, close to the fragrant jasmine tree, every blossom opened wide its petals, and out of every flower stepped invisibly, but armed each with a tiny poisoned spear, the little spirits from the flower. First, they took their places by his ear and told him evil dreams. Then they flew over his mouth and pierced his tongue with their poisoned darts. "Now we have revenged the dead," said they, and crept back again into the white bells of the jasmine. When morning came, the windows all at once flew open, and in flew the rose elf and all the swarms of bees with their queen to kill him. But he was already dead. People stood round the bed and said, "The scent of the jasmine has killed him." Then the rose elf understood the vengeance of the flowers, and told the queen bee, and she with all her swarm buzzed round the flower pot. The bees would not be driven away. Then a man took up the flower pot, and one of the bees stung his hand, and he let the flower pot fall, and it was broken to bits. Then they saw the withered skull, and they knew the dead man lying on the bed was a murderer. The queen bee hummed in the air, and sang about the vengeance of the flowers to the rose elf, and that behind each smallest leaf lurks a being who can discover and revenge every evil deed. The end. That one. Holy shit. That one reads like a Yoko Taro weapons backstory. It, like, there's a little bit of necrophilia. There's, like, putting a dead man's head in a flower pot and growing flowers on it. There's multiple deaths. Lovers dying young. Little shit-ass elves doing little shit-ass elf things. I kind of dig it. You know what? It's growing on me. I dig this. Because a guy did bad things, and, then he got the shit murdered out of him by little elves. This is my favorite one so far. I like this one. I like this one a lot. Because it's like, yes! Excuse me. I am about to kill this man with all 57 of my brothers, stabbing his tongue with poisoned spears. He fucked around and found out. Exactly. Like, bitch, it sucks to be you, but, goodbye. My god, that one's... Do we have time for one more? Oh god, this one's long. The Wild Swans is long. Oh god, we do not have time for the Wild Swans, sadly. Cause that one seems extremely long. Bush of Get His Ass! Okay, the Rose Elf is, quickly growing on all of us, I see. Just like, so it's like, next time someone, burns you, just get them a little jasmine bush. Just a little friendly jasmine bush. And they'll be like, oh, you got me some flowers, that's so sweet. But you'll know. Anyway, let's see if this next story is short enough for me to read before... If it'll take less than half an hour. Okay, I feel like this will take less than half an hour. Okay, this next one is called The Elf Hill. Some lizards... BRB getting suggested! Oh, I think at least 3 of us want to send Jasmine to, like, the same 2 people. But I will not speak any more of that in a very public stream, because I don't like to air my dirty laundry. But yes, let me go and read The Elf Hill. Some lizards were nimbly running in and out of the clefts in an old tree. They understood each other very well, for they all spoke lizard language. What a rumbling and grumbling is going on inside the old elf hill, said one of the lizards. I have not closed my eyes for the last 2 nights for the noise. I might just as well be having a toothache for all the sleep I get. Girl, same. There is something up inside, said the other lizard. They're propped up the top of the hill on 4 red posts till cockcrow this morning, to air it out thoroughly, and the elf maidens have been practicing some new dancing steps, which they are always practicing. There certainly must be something going on. Yes, I was talking to an earthworm of my acquaintance about it, said the third lizard. I love the story because it's just lizards gossiping. He came straight up out of the hill, where he had been boring into the earth for days and nights. He had heard a good deal, for the miserable creature can't see, but it can feel its way, and plays the part of eavesdropper to perfection. They're expecting visitors in the Elf Hill, grand visitors, but who they are the earthworm refused to say, or perhaps did not know. All the will-o'-the-wisps are ordered for a procession of torches, as it is called, and the silver and gold plate, of which there is any amount in the hill, is all being polished up and put out in the moonlight. Whoever can the strangers be? Said the lizards together. What on earth is happening? Hark! What a humming and buzzing! At this moment the elf hill opened, and an elderly elf maiden tripped out. She was hollow behind, but otherwise quite attractively dressed. According to a superstition, these elf maidens are hollow, like the inside of a mask. Ah, got it. She was the old elf king's housekeeper and a distant relative. She wore an amber heart upon her forehead. She moved her legs a great pace. Trip, trip! Good heavens! How fast she tripped over the ground! She went right down to the night jar in the swamp. You are invited to the Elf Hill for tonight, she said to him. But will you be so kind as to charge yourself with other invitations? You must make yourselves useful in other ways, as you don't keep house yourself. We are going to have some very distinguished visitors, goblins, who always have something to say, and so the old elf king means to show what he can do. Who is to be invited, said the nightjar. Well, everybody may come to the big ball, even human beings, if they can only talk in their sleep, or do something else after our fashion. but the choice is to be strictly limited for the grand feast. We will only have the most distinguished people. I have had a battle with the Elf King about it, because I hold that we mustn't even include ghosts. The merman and his daughters must be invited first, but I don't suppose they care much about coming on dry land, but I shall see that they each have a whetstone to sit on, or something better. So I suspect they won't decline this time. All the old demons of the first class, with Tails, the river god, and the wood sprites, and then I don't think we could pass over the grave pig, the hell horse, and the church grim, although they belong to the clergy, who are not our people. But that is merely on account of their office, and they are closely connected with us, and visit us frequently. Another asterisk. According to Danish superstition, a living horse or pig has been buried under every church. Their ghosts are said to walk at night. Oh, how delightful! Croak, said the nightjar, and he flew off to issue the invitations. The elf maidens had already begun to dance, and they danced a scarf dance, with scarfs woven of mist and moonshine. These have a lovely effect to those who care for that kind of thing. The great hall in the middle of the Elf Hill has been thoroughly polished up for the occasion. The floor was washed with moonshine, and the walls were rubbed over with witch's fat, and this made them shine with many colors like a tulip petal. The kitchen was full of frogs on spits, stuffed snake skins, and salads of toadstool spawn, mouse snouts, and hemlock. Then there was beer brewed by the marsh witch, and sparkling saltpeter wine from the vaults. Everything at the best, and rusty nails and church window panes among the kickshaws. The old elf king had his gold crown polished with pounded slate pencil, aye, and it was a head boy's slate pencil too. They are not easy to get. Pardon me. They hung up fresh curtains in the bedroom, and fixed them with a slime of snails. Yes, indeed, there was a humming and a buzzing. Now we will fumigate with horsehair and pig's bristles, and then I can do no more, said the old elf servant. Dear father, said the youngest of the elf daughters, are you not going to tell me who these grand strangers are? Very well, he said, I suppose I must tell you now. 2 of my daughters must prepare themselves to be married. 2 will certainly make marriages. The old trolled chieftain from Norway that lives on the drover field along his many rock castles and fastness and gold works, which are better than you would expect, is coming here with his 2 sons. They're coming to look for wives. The old troll is a regular honest Norwegian veteran, straightforward and merry. I used to know him in the olden days when we drank to our good fellowship. He came here to fetch a wife, but she is dead now. She was a daughter of the king of the chalk cliffs at Moen. As the saying is, he took his wife on the chalk, and brought her on a tick. I am quite anxious to see the old fellow. The sons, they say, are a pair of overgrown, ill-mannered cubs, but perhaps they are not so bad. I dare say they will improve as they get older. See if you can't lick them into shape a little bit. And when do they come? Asked one of the daughters. That depends upon wind and weather, said the Elf King. They travel economically, and they will take their chance of a ship. I wanted them to come round by Sweden, but the old fellow can't bring himself to do that yet. He doesn't march with the times, but I don't hold him with that. At this moment, too, Will-o'-the-Wisps came hopping along, one faster than the other, so of course one arrived before the other. They are coming! They are coming! They cried. Give me my crown, and let me stand in the moonlight, said the Elf King. The daughters raised their scarves and curtsied to the ground. There stood the trolled chieftain from the Dovrefield. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. He wore a crown of hardened icicles and polished fir cones, and beside this he had on a bearskin coat and snowshoes. His sons, on the other hand, had bare necks and wore no braces because they were strong men. Is that a hill? Asked the youngest of the brothers, pointing to the Elf Hill. We should call it a hole in Norway. Lads, cried the old man, holes go inwards, hills go upwards. Haven't you got eyes in your heads? The only thing that astonished them, they said, was that they understood the language without any trouble. Don't make fools of yourselves, said the old man. One might think you were only half-baked. Then they went into the Elf Hill, where the ceremony was of the grandest, although they had been got together in a hurry. You must almost say they had been blown together. It was all charming, and arranged to suit everyone's taste. The merman and his daughters sat at the table in great tubs of water, and said it was just like being at home. Everyone had an excellent table manners, except the two Norwegian trolls. They put their feet up on the table, but then they thought anything they did was right. "Take your feet out of the way of the dishes," said the old troll, and they obeyed him, but not at once. They tickled the ladies they took in to dinner with fir cones out of their pocket. Then they pulled off their boots, so as to be quite comfortable, and handed the boots to the ladies to hold. Their father, the old trolled chieftain, was very different. He told no end of splendid stories about the proud Norwegian mountains, and the waterfalls dashing down in white foam with a roar like thunder. He told them about the salmon leaping up against the rushing water when the nixies played their golden harps. Then he went on to tell them about the sparkling winter nights when the sledge bells rang and the lads flew over the ice with blazing lights, the ice which was so transparent that you could see the startled fish darting away under your feet. Yes, indeed, he could tell stories, and you could see and hear the things he described. The sawmills going, the men and maids singing their songs and dancing the merry howling dance. Huzzah! All at once the troll gave the elf housekeeper a smacking kiss. Such a kiss it was, and yet they were not a bit related. Then the elf maidens had to dance, first plain dancing, and then step dancing, and then it was most becoming to them. Then came the fancy dance. Preserve us, how nimble they were on their legs. You couldn't tell where they began or where they ended. You couldn't tell which arms and which were legs. They were all mixed up together like shavings in a saw pit. They twirled round and round so often that it made the hell horse feel quite giddy and unwell, and he had to leave the table. "Purr," said the old troll. "There is some life in those legs, but what else can they do besides dancing and pointing their toads and all those whirligigs? We shall soon show you," said the Elf King. And he called out his youngest daughter. She was thin and transparent as moonshine, and was the most ethereal of all the daughters. She put a little white stick in her mouth and vanished instantly. This was her accomplishment. But the troll said he did not think like that accomplishment in a wife, nor did he think his boys would appreciate it. The second one could walk by her own side if she had a shadow, and no elves have shadows. The third was quite different. She had studied in the Marsh Witch's brewery and understood larding alder stumps with glowworms. "She will be a good housewife," said the troll, and then he saluted her with his eyes instead of drinking her health, for he did not want to drink too much. Now came the turn of the fourth. She had a big golden harp to play, and when she touched the first string, everybody lifted up their left legs, for all the elfin folk are left-legged. But when she touched the second string, everybody had to do what she wished. "She is a dangerous woman," said the troll, but both his sons left the hill, for they were very tired of it all. "And what can the next daughter do?" asked the old troll. "I have learned to like the Norwegians," she said, "and I shall never marry unless I can go to Norway." But the smallest of the sisters whispered to the troll, "That is only because she once heard a song which said that when the world came to an end, the rocks of Norway would still stand, and that is why she wants to go there. She is so afraid of being exterminated." "Ho ho," said the troll, "so that slipped out, but what can the seventh do?" "The sixth comes before the seventh," said the Elf King, for he could reckon, but she would not come forward. "I can only tell people the truth," she said. "Nobody cares for me, and I have enough to do in making my winding sheet." Now came the seventh and last. What could she do? Well, she could tell stories as many as ever she liked. "Here are my 5 fingers," said the old troll. "Tell me a story for each one." The elf maiden took hold of his wrist, which he chuckled and laughed till he nearly choked. When she came to the 4th finger, which had a gold ring on it, and asked if he knew there was to be a betrothal, the troll said, "Hold fast what you have got. The hand is yours, and I will have you for a wife myself." The elf maiden said that the stories about Guldbrand, the 4th finger, and little Peter Playman, the 5th, had not been told. "Never mind, keep those till winter. Then you shall tell us about the fir, and the birch, and the fairy gifts, and the tingling frost. You shall have every opportunity of telling us stories. Nobody up there does it yet. We will sit in the stone hall where the pine logs blaze, and drink mead out of the golden horns of the old Norwegian kings. The river god gave me a couple. Sorry. when we sit in the mountain, sprite comes to play us a visit, where he will sing you the songs of the satyr girls. The salmon will leap up in the waterfalls and beat against the stone wall, but it won't get in. Ah, you may believe me when I say that we lead a merry life there in good old Norway. But where are the lads? Yes, where were the lads? They were running about the fields, blowing out all the will-o-wisps, who came so willingly for the torchlight procession. Why do you muck about there? Said the troll. I have taken a mother for you. Now you can come and take one of the aunts. But the lads said they would rather make a speech and drink toasts. They had no wish to marry. Then they made their speeches and drank toasts and tipped their glasses up to show they had emptied them. After that, they pulled off their coats and went to sleep on the table to show they were quite at home. But the old troll danced round the room with his young bride and exchanged boots with her, which was grander than exchanging rings. There is the cock crowing, said the old housekeeper. Now we must shut the shutters, so the sun may not burn us up. Then the hill closed up, but the lizards went on running up and down the clefts of the tree, and they said to each other, Ah, how much I liked the old troll. I liked the boys better, said the earthworm, but then it couldn't see, poor miserable little creature that it was. That's it. That's the end. Big gulps of water. Oh, fuck. Oh. That one was an experience. Like, I had fun reading it, but, like, that was less like a proper story and more just like a bunch of stuff happening. like we had this guy, a troll dilf, and his two asshole sons, who were just like, we don't want to get married, we just want to drink and tickle people. And the earthworm was just like, oh, I quite like them. It's like, you didn't see them being shitholes. Fuck your opinion, earthworm. You're the dumbest one here. Well, I think I'm going to start the cooldown portion of the stream, where we just talk and chat and just, you know, live. Hold up. So yeah, I'm assuming that everybody's favorite story tonight was The Rose Elf, because it's a story about murder and revenge and fucked up stuff. I feel like that's like an easy choice. Also, I feel like we're all gonna start giving Jasmine to our enemies. Fucked up in the fun to read way. Yeah, exactly. Like, I quite liked it. Just like this little elf living in roses accidentally stumbles on a murder plot and then reveals it and eventually ends up getting the guy killed by other flower elves that were living in a jasmine plant grown by a grieving woman using her beloved's skull. I like the one with the pocket sand too. Okay. The story that ended with pocket sand. Oh my god, it's just like, I was literally like, I think I cracked up. I think I actually cracked up. Just like, listen. Pocket sand. Oh my god. I love it. Fucking love it. Obviously I like the Little Mermaid because it's Little Mermaid. It's classic. I love it. Sorry, itchy. I am scratching an itch. I was only here for the Rose Elf, unfortunately. Yeah, but that was kind of like the winner of the evening. So if you had to be here for any of them, like, I'm glad it was that one. Because everyone seems to like that one. Ugh. guzzling water right now because I was reading for so long. Hold up, I'm gonna switch to a little bit more lively music to wake back up. Come on. Play the music. Play the music. There we go. But yeah, I feel like I know what birthday gift to get for a certain somebody this year. And they'll be like, "Oh, you got such and such, like some beautiful flowers. How sweet and thoughtful." And then I'll know, and you guys will know. And I'm just gonna be like laughing off to the side evilly. Cause like, as a unicorn, I've talked to a lot of elves. And the smaller they get, the more gremlin-y they get. Hans Christian Andersen was right about that. The small elves sometimes get a little bit stabby. It's really, really funny. Oh yeah, all these assets are free assets, the ones that I'm using, and all of the stories that I read tonight were in the public domain, so, you know, Twitch, don't at me. There was copyright on none of these. Like, I would do more book readings, except, like, I'm pretty sure Twitch and copyright will put a kibosh on that, just really squish it. Oh. I had a lot of fun. I really liked that. I don't know how you guys felt about it, but I rather liked it. What did I miss? I fell asleep. Did you actually fall asleep? Like, I kind of hope you did, because I know at one point my cats fell asleep. They were both sitting nearby, and they just fell asleep while I was reading The Little Mermaid. Yes? Oh, yeah! Ah, yes! I've got sleep powers. So basically I read as many Hans Christian Andersen fairy tales that as I deemed appropriate. There was one that I had to cut it off because it started being really, really bad. But only one. I think I got like 5 stories in. There was Little Mermaid, Rose Elf, Hans Clotter something. I forget the name. The Elf Hill. No, that's 4. That's 4. Okay. But yeah. Yeah, I think I'll definitely do like another. It's not gonna be like super frequent. Maybe like once a month we'll do this. Just to kind of like relax and vibe and chill. Oh yes, this coming week, I'm going to be having a stream where we talk about mental health, and I explicitly will be going into my fight against anxiety and how I came to a turning point with that. And I hope there's something in that that other people find useful for their own battles with anxiety. Because we're all anxious bitches. It's okay. And so, you know, by offering my own experiences, I hope to help others overcome their... Well, overcome may not be the right word, because overcome implies that mental illness fully goes away. Which... might or might not. I don't fucking know. But I aim to help people to take control back of their lives from their mental illnesses, so that way it doesn't, you know, control who they are or what they do. That they get to decide, not their anxiety, not their mental illness. And Bloom just redeemed story time! Right after all of the story reading! You cheeky dick waffle! Any prompts for the story? Or am I free to just go wherever I please? While I wait for Bloom's response, did anyone else have any particular parts they like? School. Okay. So, wait, is this story time? Wait, is this the one where I tell us... Is this the one where I make up a fairy tale, or is this the one where I tell a story about myself? I forget which is which. It's somebody who's not on mobile, please check. I genuinely forgot. Hold on, let me go on my Twitch and pray to God that I don't hear my own voice. Not that I think it's super bad, I don't want to hear it. Really weird. Cute. Alright. Themes. I will share a story related to a word topic you give me. Okay, so I'm talking about stuff. You have a separate improv story time. Improv story time, that's it. I should probably name it something different in that case. Okay, so, what's a story I can tell about, school? Can I find one that's good so I can end the stream on good vibes? Because most of those stories I'm coming with about school are, not great. But I'm trying to come up with a good school story. Oh, let's go to college. That'll work. Let's see. College. Ah, no! Oh, here's one that's, kind of fucked up, but doesn't actively make me cringe. So, here we go. So, I was part of my college's choir group for 6 years. I was always placed at alto 2, to the shock of absolutely no one. And one year, we were going to sing Christmas carols and other assorted songs at a women's correctional facility, aka a women's prison. Now, I wasn't really nervous because it's not like they read all our names, but the only reason I was even remotely nervous is because, I share a last name with a prominent legal figure in the area, and I was afraid that if my last name got out, somebody in there might have been put there by that person and, you know, thought there was a connection and take it out on me. But this is not relevant to the story in any way, it's just my anxiety. So, we go to the prison, and we're singing the Christmas carols, and it's growing great, everything's just fine, and then I see people start to look very worried up and to the left, because there were these huge bleachers, right? They went really high up, because it's like a huge gymnasium, which was really cool. So I kind of, like, side-eye, to kind of look up without looking too far away from my sheet. You know, trying to not make it too obvious that I'm looking, unlike the people around me. And there's a woman having a grand mal seizure in the bleachers. Don't worry, she was fine. I'm just gonna put that right there. She was fine. We got word later that she was totally fine. But, good God, we were all scared. And so, fun fact, the professor has told us in the past, if stuff starts happening, you keep singing. You don't stop for anything. Unless it's a natural disaster and we all have to get out of there. You don't stop singing. So I just kept going, but I heard a few other people stop, and I'm like, remember your training! Oh my God, it was a really surreal moment to be singing Joy to the World while a lady's being carried away on a stretcher by medics. Like, it was just one of those moments where I'm just like, am I the asshole? Like, I didn't... Should I stop? I've been told not to stop, but should I stop? But yeah, again, I need to state, we learned later that this woman was fine. That was a very, surreal experience. I know that's only loosely tangentially related to school, but it's the best story I could come up with that's not horribly depressing. Did the conductor stop? Oh God, no, he did not stop. conductor was the professor. I almost said his name. Oh my god, I'm dumb. I'm not dumb. I'm just unicorn brain. And his back was to the bleachers. I don't think he figured out until afterwards. Then you keep going, of course. Yeah, like, that's what I was told to do, and it's not like I'm a medical professional, so, you know, like, there's nothing I could have done. I would have just gotten in the way. But there's still a small part of me once in a while that just goes, was that a dick move? But it's like, I'm gonna go with no? Oh, also, I love this little blanket asset. I just think it's so cute. I love it. Now I'm all cozied up. Wait, is this? Hold up. Hey, Cat Boy. Is that the person who made this? I think that's the person who made this. Oh, they put credit on their asset. That's very smart. That's very smart. And that's a cute way to do that, too, because clothing has tags. Anyway, I'm going to end the stream here. Thank you so much to everybody for coming tonight. I hope you had a great night in one way or the other. I will see you on Monday, hopefully. I might not, just because some medical issues are coming up. I will let you know on Monday whether I will be streaming or not. But I will post my schedule on Sunday anyway. And I will see you all when I see you all. Take care of yourselves. Have a great night. And I will see you all later. Bye-bye!